final speaker is someone who probably doesn't need to be introduced by me to anyone who's here with the NUT conference, because he's your Deputy General Secretary. I've known Kevin for a number of years now. When I knew him, he was a Bolshe trade union branch secretary who suffered the indignity, really, of being elected to high office, but is still willing to associate with troublemakers, which is a wonderful thing. And according to my notes here, you tweet as @CyclingKev. So there we are. Over to you, Kevin.
Well, I wanted to start where Nancy started, about being in Brighton. NUT is very pleased to be in Brighton. So, Brighton citizens, thank you for the welcome to your wonderful city. We've had a very good time here. And I'm also pleased to be in Brighton because I don't know whether there's an official award of this, but Brighton NUT is the best organised NUT branch in the country. It pains me to say that as in terms of NUT density, effectiveness of the strike, is the best organised NUT branch in the country, and that's real, and we need to learn lessons from that and spread them around the country. So very pleased to be here for that reason. I think the platform's fantastic, so I'm very pleased to be sharing it with you. And I want to say that Labour has got a lot to be proud of, but I think it's a little bit far away. But it should be. Labour should be proud of the comprehensive reform. They should be proud of the 1944 Education Act. You know, that was the access of girls to state secondary education. It's a fantastic move forward. Comprehensive education, a fantastic move forward. The party should be really proud of Tony Benn and Caroline Benn. I went to hear Tony Benn speak as a young teacher in Ealing when I was living in Ealing in 1985, I guess. And it was always Caroline that talked about education, but he deferred to Caroline on education. But I heard him talk about it and the passion of the man, and he had a picture that still stays with me. He said education should be a ladder, not a hurdle. And I'm afraid that education now has become, how do we drop kids out of it? What test do they fail? It's not a set of steps that you work on to move yourself up at the pace you can go. So lots to be proud of in Labour's history. But the question, I think, is really germane. How can Labour rebuild trust with teachers? Because in 2010, the NUT conducted an opinion poll survey just before the general election. We didn't publish it. And the results of that opinion poll survey, we have published them since for a different reason, but were that the Labour Party was being supported by 33% of teachers, the Conservative Party by 32% of teachers, and the Lib Dems by 27%. These are astonishing figures. After 13 years in government, the fact that Labour was only getting 33% support amongst teachers tells you there was something to do, that Labour does have to think about the support of teachers. I think, Nancy, did you say the majority in your 3,000? Did you say that? Or we talked before? But there's 1,000 teachers in every constituency, and there's 1,000 friends of families of teachers in every constituency. It matters in marginal seats what teachers think about the political parties. Now, that astonishing state of affairs had changed by this Christmas. The Lib Dems had gone down we did another opinion poll, and we published the 2010 one because of to demonstrate the change that had happened. So the Lib Dems dropped from 27, catastrophic decline amongst teachers, to 7%. The Tories halved from 32 to 16, and Labour up from 33 to 57. But I have to tell you that I think that's much more an anti-Gove feeling amongst teachers than it is so far a pro-Labour feeling amongst teachers. So I think there's work to do, and I think there's a conversation between organised teacher unionists and the Labour Party that would help matters. The Labour Secretaries of State for Education, I was just trying to remember them this afternoon when I should have been thinking about something else, but David Blunkett, Estelle Morris, Charles Clarke, Ruth Kelly, Alan Johnson and Ed Balls. Teachers will have had a favourite amongst those, and it will have been Estelle Morris. But I'm afraid none of them actually changed the central thrust of the Tory policy that we've been left with. On my Cycling Kev Twitter account, I say the problem started in 1989 with the Great Education Reform Act, when Kenneth Baker brought in league tables, Ofsted, SATs, local management of schools. That's the start of the rot. And I'm afraid while Labour did some good things, and I want to come back and say some of the good things that Labour did in office, it didn't it didn't challenge the central organising idea that the Conservatives brought in of marketising education. We now see that what the Tories were doing then is part of something that's happening on a global scale. We call it GERM now, the Global Education Reform Movement. And the set of ideas that the Tories brought in England and Wales in 1989 are spreading. They're in Australia, they're in the English-speaking world and going beyond it. And somehow Labour needs to come to terms with that and start to think about how we're going to reverse that whole agenda. And we will have to work with Labour to do that. Labour did do good things, and I'm going to say first a set of good things that were two-faced, where there was a problem with them. When Labour came in, they got rid of grant-maintained schools. That was fantastic. And then they introduced academies. Now, absolutely not the academies of the Tories. Academies where they put lots of money in, schools that were in challenging circumstances, and where it helped. It wasn't the same idea that the Tories had, but it's the virus and it's the bridge, as Sian said, that's allowed the Tories to bring them in more widely. So it's a problem. They did some fantastic things. My partner, my wife, was a primary school teacher in 1997, and the Tories had left primary teachers with a 10-subject national curriculum, no matter what age the kids were. My partner was an infant teacher, and the notion of teaching history in the way they wanted to children, as she used to say to me, the kids will come in the afternoon, they say, have we had dinner yet? The idea that you can get a historical sense where the children don't know whether they've had dinner yet, it doesn't work. You can talk about history with children of that age. You can say, and geography, you can say, where did your parents come from? Where did your grandparents come from? And have that sort of conversation, but not the curriculum the Tories had. And Labour released teachers from that. And they allowed primary teachers to concentrate on literacy and maths, and English and maths. And it was a big step forward. But then Labour brought in the literacy hour and the numeracy hour and took away all the freedom that teachers had. And so it was a good step forward and then a step back. And I think that some people in Labour have realised that. I was on a platform with Jim Knight, who was a schools minister, Lord Jim Knight he is now, at the Labour Party conference a couple of years ago, and he was freely acknowledging that Labour, he said it was right to bring in the literacy hour and the numeracy hour, but they should have stopped. They should have let go of it, because they'd taken away all teachers' initiative and they kept telling teachers what to do. And some Labour politicians realised the error of that. So some of those things are two-sided, as I said, but a huge increase in funding, a limit of 30 for class sizes. These are really important gains. A big increase in pay, unfortunately tied to performance-related pay with the performance threshold, but still teachers would have liked that increase in pay. And towards the end, a very big step forward with the introduction of a protection of teachers not to have to cover when their colleague is away, which is an absurdity. The idea of a surgeon covering for somebody else when they're not there, it doesn't happen. You have proper relief services. You don't have somebody do two jobs at once. So Labour brought in protections on cover, and they also, for the first time, gave primary teachers some time to do planning and preparation and assessment. So these were steps forward, but they didn't change those polling numbers. And I think the reason they didn't change those polling numbers were what Carly Ann said, that actually Labour gave people PPA time and protections on cover, but only by getting teaching assistants effectively to take the class when the teachers weren't there. And teachers didn't want that. They want to have qualified teachers in front of. TAs are extremely valuable and should be paid much better for the job they do of being a teaching assistant, not being underpaid to replace teachers. So there were good and bad things in that. And I want to work with Labour Front Bench, with Tristram Hunt and others, with Kevin Brennan, to look at how we can start to change the narrative, because we have to move away from the Great Education Reform Act. We have to move away from the global education reform movement, and we've got to find a way of talking about alternatives. And I think teachers have to help with that, because I think it isn't easy to challenge when you've got a prevailing dynamic that all the journalists are signed up to, that many academics are signed up to. It isn't easy to break out of that. But there are things that Labour could do to start to break out of it. There are alternatives that exist in Europe that show you can organise education very differently. Finland is the one that we refer to all the time. You can't have complete parallels between Finland, which is quite a small country, and the enormity of England. You can't have the parallels exactly. But in Finland, they have no league tables. They have no Ofsted. There is no question of parental choice. Not because they don't give parents a choice, but because parents send their children to the school that's next door to them. And it's a good school and they're happy with it. So it doesn't come up as a question. So we know it's possible to organise education in a different way. Oh God, so Finland, maybe that's a crap education system then. Actually, it's the best education system in the world. The best in terms of the highest results and the lowest gap between rich kids and poor kids. So the best education system in the world is organised nothing like the way we organise our education system. So I think Labour should be talking much more positively about the fact that we don't have to do just what the Americans and the Australians are doing. There are other models to explore. And I think they need to talk about some of the positives that are less unalloyed. Labour did the London Challenge, which transformed education in London, and they don't talk about it. I don't know why they don't talk about it. Michael Gove closed it down in 2010. It's a cheap, I don't mean cheap, it was much less expensive than academies. It was getting teachers to collaborate. It was using local authorities to bring schools together, and it was successful. Gove closed it down because it wasn't the marketisation direction he wanted to go on. Labour should be talking about, praising that. They should be talking about Sure Start. They are talking about Sure Start, but we have to talk about it as well. And comprehensive education, they should be, and the 1944 Education Act, these should be things that Labour are talking about and promoting till the cows come home. There are things that we need to do to help, because there is this big problem of the link, and Nancy talked about it, between poverty and achievement. That people say, if only teachers tried harder, then we could get kids out of poverty and kids could get the results. And that doesn't happen with the NHS, actually. We know that health outcomes are worse for people that are lower down the social system, but we don't blame NHS hospitals for that. People know it's the poverty. So the hospitals don't get blamed for it. Schools do, but there is a complication, because any individual child can make it. I'm a working class boy from a South Wales, mining, my dad wasn't a miner, but from a mining area. The classic story, first boy from the street ever to go to university, as well as from my family. So there are individual children who can make it. And there are individual black boys, who, although statistically they don't do well, but there are individual boys who will achieve massively. And so I think we have to say that it's the job of teachers to encourage every child to achieve, and to say to every black boy, every black girl, every working class boy, every working class girl, you can overcome the obstacles that you face, because individually they might be able to. And teachers have to say that and drive every child on. But the balance for that has to be, politicians have to say, but we know that despite teachers trying that, it's poverty that's the real problem. And Tristram Hunt should say he knows it's poverty that's the problem, and he intends to do something about the poverty. While teachers are trying individually to challenge with every child, we can't change the poverty in our schools. I think teachers should be part of a trades union, and a social justice trades union that is trying to challenge poverty, but you can't do it through your pedagogy, you can't do it in the classroom. So teachers have to drive every individual child on. But Labour has to break with the global education reform movement and say it wants to do something about poverty. I'd be very pleased to vote for Nancy as I go.